All right, should we do some faces here?
Sure, we can do that.
All right, well, we get the all right. We get the nice studio setup here in Evanston. It's been a while, man. When is the last time we recorded? Like 4 days ago? I'm just like in a new world. Let's do a podcast here. Welcome on to the beginning of our Summer League prospect review. Very excited to bring this to you. And I'm not sure how much we're going to get through because we do have a bunch of news that's piled up that we got to do as well. But let's just start by talking about the prospects at the top of the draft. We're going to go loosely as we go through this. It's going to be multiple episodes, of course, in order of the teams as they drafted. So let's begin with the Atlanta Hawks, Danny, and number 1 overall pick, Zachary Rissache. He only played 2 games due to a hip issue.
Yeah, he only played 2 games, about 15 points, 5 rebounds per game. And and for me, the story with Rissache, both in the mix. I was at Summer League a little bit shorter than I usually am, so I did synergy film as well. And for me, it was in the mix of in-person and synergy for me with Rissache. It largely confirmed what I had seen on film with him, where I think that he has like support player energy is probably the way that I would describe it, where that doesn't necessarily mean a bad thing, but he is trying to fit in where he gets in. He's not a particularly ball dominant player. And so if you like that sort of thing, if you think that fits in, if you have guys to slot above him, then that can work. And if you don't, then it might be a little bit of a challenge.
Yeah, I thought when you said support player energy, I think in the sense that that's kind of where I see him ending up. I agree. I thought he came out with the most aggressive scoring mindset that we've seen him. And I think he was no doubt encouraged to do that as the star of this Summer League team. This is not really a situation that he's been in before. And also, you noted how at the lower levels, particularly for the French national team, he had games where he would just kind of disappear. So he came out very determined in his 2 games to not be like that. And he was extremely aggressive, took a bunch of threes off the dribble.
That's
And
true.
only made one of them, but he was really aggressive trying to like split pick and rolls. He showed off this nice behind the back move. He talked before he was drafted and after he was drafted about how the biggest thing he needs to work on is his dribbling. And I thought he showed a little bit more dynamism there. Most impressive aspect of his game to me was probably some of his touch as a finisher, getting to the basket. He showed off a hook shot, showed off a pretty decent left hand. He had one big dunk in transition, and considering those were about a 50% prospect for him with it squirting out of his small hands in France, I was pleased with that. It was a nice lefty dunk. He had shown the ability to do that a little bit in France as well. So he didn't make any of these threes off the dribble. I liked seeing that aggressiveness. He took one from like 26 feet with 12 on the shot clock off the dribble. And that touch around the basket, because I don't think he's going to be a guy who's really going to like get to the basket and finish with physicality. So if he does attack off of closeouts or second side pick and roll, that type of stuff, to be able to finish with touch a little bit further away from the basket, not have to just go right through the chest of the big man, was encouraging. Only 2 games because he took all these tough threes off the dribble and didn't really make many of them, although some of them were close enough that the numbers weren't fantastic for him. But I thought if you wanted to see something where it's like, oh, maybe there's a little bit more in terms of shot creation and scoring, then we might have thought, like, he gave us at least some subtle signs in that direction. Nothing game changing, obviously.
I would say subtle, because to me, the isolation stuff that Rissache did wasn't particularly impressive, and that wasn't something I liked on him. I was higher on him as prospect than a fair amount of people were. I didn't love that in his film anyway. And put a little bit more color on the support player energy. What I mean by that in part is that Shea is a willing cutter and passer. And so generally you think about players who do that, that's within the flow of the offense. It's not as much being dynamic. And one of my biggest frustrations with Shea, and again, Summer League, first of all, with the stats, but also with the film, remember that these aren't players trying to replicate their NBA role. In part, like what Summer League is for them to try out new things, for them to extend beyond their capabilities and see how that works out. Was that I brought this up a few years ago. Paolo Banchero was a prospect where like the snapshot, it's like when the player releases the shot, what would you expect? And with Shea in the film and like watching all of his offensive possessions, the ones you'd expect him to miss, he missed. Like if it's a contested 2 or an isolation, that's not necessarily a bad thing. What you just need is for those shots to be fewer. And that is going to be a smaller proportion of his shots when we get to the NBA, in part because he'll be playing with Trae Young and better supporting talent, and in part because that's just not what you want him to do.
Couple other interesting stats on him: 4-16 from 3, only 3 of 7 from the foul line. So 7 free throw attempts in the 2 games that he played. He played almost exactly 30 minutes a game, and didn't have a steal. Defensively, I thought just didn't see much from him either way. Certainly wasn't standing out in terms of like how he was pressuring the ball or anything like that. And he was one of the top offensive options. Yeah.
I was intrigued that the Hawks Summer League coaching staff had him guarding on ball a fair amount. Like that's not something I necessarily expected. It might've been opportunity based or something else, but I don't think Shea does that at the NBA, like against starters in the NBA, but I liked that they tried it.
Yeah, and they also did a bunch of switching as well in the Washington game. And as we'll get to, Washington didn't exactly have a dominating post threat out there. But he looked okay switching on to bigger guys as well. So I think one of my concerns about him was that he wouldn't really be a plus defensively on the perimeter. And it didn't see much yay or nay on that personally.
I saw 2 things that stuck with me a little bit there. So there was one play in that Washington game where he got totally boxed out by John Butler Jr. And it reminded me that Shea is just not physically strong at this point. I think he could fill out a little bit, but
John Butler Jr. is like 7 feet, 190, by the way. He was the Portland Trailblazers' best tank commander a couple of years ago.
Yes. And so that was a little bit concerning. And something that I thought about in Shea's second game was I wondered a little bit about who you kind of want him, who he defends best, I guess is the way to put it, because the bigger wings, he's a little bit small for those guys in terms of weight, not necessarily length, though he does have this small positive wingspan, as we talked about in our draft preview. And then, those fast guards, those are going to be a problem for him, just like they are for anybody who's his size. And so like maybe he ends up like defending some 2s and 3s. Like it's just a little bit that part of the sales pitch for Shea has always been a little bit awkward for me. But I thought about it a little bit during film because you think about the players who are on NBA rosters.
Anything else on him, or should we talk about the rest of this Atlanta group?
We can move on. Unfortunately, we can't talk about Nikola Jurisic too much because he fractured his left foot in the second game. I thought he had some interesting moments against the Wizards in the only full game he played, had a surprising transition dunk. He was the 43rd overall selection. And so we're probably just going to have to see more of him in preseason. And then, I'm guessing he's not going to start the year in the Hawks rotation, but I liked what I saw in the limited amount we saw.
Yeah, he, in his own right, was playing point guard, which is not really what he does. He's a shooting guard, and he announced himself with this big 2-handed dunk right at the start, and then proceeded to struggle and then suffered, it sounds like, a broken foot. We don't really have much of a timeline on that yet. But he's kind of like a physical guard with like a developing jump shot. I would say, wasn't really comfortable against pressure as a point guard, but can do some stuff on the ball, but really kind of more of a shooting guard, ball handling level. But he looked athletically like he can hang, and he doesn't have like a terrible skill level. Again, we didn't see as much of him, so not going to get into it quite that much. But there were he didn't look like, especially because he was playing out of position, but he didn't look like a guy who just like couldn't hack it at all. Yeah. Like he did a few interesting things off the dribble.
He did, and 6'7", forward-sized guy, and this will be his age 20 season. So on the younger side, came out of Mega, was a teammate of Topic for a portion of Topic's season. He changed teams mid-year.
Yeah,
Then
and then Kobe Buffkin, by the way, he was supposed to be their starting point guard, and then what was his injury? His shoulder? No, it was like it was something less concerning than that. But that's why Jurisic had to play point guard, and then he went out with a foot injury as well.
yes, and so then the next kind of Hawks selection who played was Mohamed Gay, who was the 39th pick in 23, 6'11" big out of Senegal and Washington State. This will be his age 22 season. The first thing when I saw him live, the first thing that struck out was that Gay was shooting threes pretty aggressively. He was 4 of 14 overall. That's 29%. On those shots was only 37% from the field, though he took a fair amount of his shots from three. And so, like, I mean, really, when you're for second year guys, and we'll talk about there are a couple different varieties of second year guys that play in summer league. To me, what you're looking for is somebody to pop, and that means like whether you're super familiar with them or you're not super familiar with them because whether they played in the NBA or not. It's did they look like they could hold their own? And with Gay, I'm just like, okay, like what exactly are you supposed to be? He had a couple of good blocks, but I wasn't blown away.
Well, Gay, you'll recall, I actually kind of liked just some of his tools as more of like a 4 last year, if he could figure the shooting out, which he didn't really in college. So I was encouraged that he really was firing away here. His shot doesn't look amazing. Looks like if it does develop, it'll be more to just kind of a passable level. He basically had his whole first year ruined, played only 6 games in Atlanta and 4 in College Park in the G League because of a back issue. And he still is only 21, so he's not that old. But this is really his first significant action since last summer league. And he was playing at center, which I think is not necessarily going to be his absolute best position. He's pretty thin. Didn't look great as a finisher. Like the hands are not perfect. He tried to show more off the dribble. Like he even would kind of meander into the lane off the dribble. And he made a couple of little like turnaround jumpers off the dribble from the dotted line. But also, wasn't really, you'd like to see him maybe as a 4, attacking closeouts, and then maybe providing you with some supplemental rim protection. I just don't think he's big or strong enough to play a ton of center. Maybe he could do that some off the bench as more of a switch guy. As I noted, they were kind of doing, using him in that role, which was okay. Wasn't necessarily going up against the most awesome ball handlers in the world. So I just having a lost year, this is really him just kind of getting back into things again and playing center rather than playing at the 4 like he was last year. And I think if his jumper could develop, he's a guy who may be kind of more on the fringes of rotation. He has some intriguing rim protection ability, although maybe not quite at like a full center level. And same thing with like his rebounding and heft. But can move his feet decently and has like a few ball skills, even if it looks awkward. So there still is a path in terms of this skill set to maybe making some sort of an impact, but having a lost year did him no favors.
And as a note for Gay, his contract fully guaranteed for this year, then has non-guarantees. One is a non-guarantee, then a team option for 2 subsequent years. So if it works out, the Hawks can keep him for a while. They just have 1 more year to evaluate him. The other Hawk who played in Summer League who has a guaranteed contract is EJ Liddell. Liddell got 6'6" forward at Ohio State, got drafted by the Pelicans and tore his ACL in Summer League his first year, then was basically kind of floating for a year, and then they signed him to a guaranteed contract after that because they didn't want to, it was tax issues and various things. And then he still has, this is his last guaranteed year, has a non-guarantee after that. And I thought it was telling that Liddell came off the bench for their Summer League team. Primarily, I think he started 1 of the 5 games he played in. And there was a point where I especially because of his story, I really wanted him to do well. And he just, again, it's the idea of did he pop? Like, other than getting fouled a bunch, he didn't really show me a ton.
Yeah, I should have mentioned that about Gay too, that he got fouled 12 times and committed 12 fouls, I think, in 3 games, which is interesting. He was like basically responsible for the game, exclusively responsible for the game, just grinding to a halt against the Wizards in the second quarter for like a 4 or 5 minute period. Yeah, Liddell, just the hope was like there's been a lot of guys like him, obviously, where you thought, maybe he could be sort of like a PJ Tucker, Draymond Green type of guy. He can move his feet pretty well, but he doesn't look to have like that sort of strength out there. Like you don't feel him defensively in that way. He's like, all right, he can maybe move his feet kind of passively, but he doesn't play particularly hard. He's tried to take more threes. There's only 3 of 14 from downtown, 10 of 30 from the field. overall in 5 games, and wasn't really the thought was maybe too in college where he was so devastating was just like using his size as an interior scorer. He slimmed down a little bit since then. Obviously, he had the ACL. This is going into his 3rd year. He was essentially a throw-in just to make the money and the roster spots work in the deal for DeJounte Murray. And yeah, I mean, I can't say that he really popped in any kind of a significant way, and not the best if you're hoping that he's going to evolve into maybe sort of this PJ Tucker-esque role player. It's not the best setting for him, but
True.
you wanted to see his effort at least like totally popping off the page, and maybe some athleticism and some really high level of defense. And he kind of looks like a guy out there. So I can't say I'm particularly enthused about his 3rd season with the Hawks, although there is a chance for him to maybe get some minutes there.
Potentially. I mean, we'll see how their front court rotation shakes out. They have a lot at center at the time being, but the forward, there's a little bit of fluidity with the Hawks forwards. And of course, there could be some fluidity with their roster as well. Ready to move on to the Wiz?
Well, I just tried to hit the mouse to scroll down to there, but I missed. I couldn't. Maybe
Well,
I'll
you
try
have
again.
you have another 14 tries to catch up to Alex Sarr. So,
Oh man, so let's start there. I'm sure everyone has seen that he had this legendary 0 for 15 game, and the overall numbers in terms of efficiency, we'll get to them, but they were extremely grisly. I mean, it's got to be nearly unprecedented in terms of volume and inefficiency for a summer league big. What he put up there, but you and I were both relatively high on him in this class. I think we both had him second on our boards.
I had him first, but
Okay.
we both had him. We both had the same tier 1. We just had a different order within our tier 1.
So I guess where we can start then is, did what you saw worry you in terms of your pre-draft evaluation about him?
Mostly no. The most important sales pitch for Sarr is his defense, and I thought that it wasn't perfect, but there was a lot of that I liked. We'll get into the specifics there. And then I was never the biggest fan of his offense. I think that Sarr profiles as a lower usage big, but one who has at least the potential to do a couple of different things offensively. And the comparison that I threw out there a couple times in the scouting report is like Evan Mobley on offense, but kind of like Evan Mobley now, where we're not as high on what it could be. It's a little bit more realistic on it than Mobley back when he was in high school or was at SC. And so with Sarr, like, his offensive game is really limited. I was never a believer in his jump shot, and I'm still not a believer in his jump shot at the time being.
Well, not a believer in the sense that you don't even think it has any chance to develop at all?
No. Like, no. Like,
As of right now, like, this moment.
As of right now, like, if you were to throw him into an NBA rotation as a starter or as a backup, I would not expect him to shoot particularly well for the 24-25 season. But is that projectable moving forward? Certainly.
He scored 22 points in 4 games, 9 of 47 from the field, 2 of 17 on 3-pointers.
And none of those were the most concerning thing to me. Can I get there briefly?
Yeah.
4 free throw attempts in 119 minutes.
That's concerning.
I don't care if you have a finesse game. You need to draw more fouls than that.
Yeah, and he does have a finesse game. I think, I'll get to my concern level in a little bit. I want to just kind of go through more of what we saw, and then we can discuss how significant it is. The jump shot is probably not there yet. I thought he was reasonably aggressive taking him, right? I mean, he's 17 3-point attempts in 4 games is certainly very solid. I mean, the 0 for 15 game, he was 0 of 7 on threes, so that's not maybe quite as bad as it looked. So he is going to continue working on that part of his game for sure. And yeah, I mean, he shot 28% from 3 in the shorter line, although he did take them, and so that's kind of why it was projectable now. And he was even on a team that was trying to win, so I don't think that they would have just let him shoot those. He's coming off the bench, like he's trying to actually make a positive contribution. Like, I don't think the coaching staff would have just let him fire away if they didn't think he could make them. Obviously didn't here. I thought in terms of his form, it looked a little hitchy. I mean, there's probably a little bit of surgery that needs to be done on it. But he's kind of the old Tim Duncan style where he sort of like doesn't begin a smooth motion and then all of a sudden it like really speeds up and he just like fires it. So like if you go back and look at film like Tim Duncan shooting free throws at some of his bad times, and when you're drafting him, you're taking a chance on the jump shot. I don't feel any worse about his jump shot other than just that, like, okay, this is one setting in which he didn't show improvement yet, but it's 17 attempts. We're not going to go crazy on it. The finishing at the rim was far worse even than I thought it would be, and I already was pretty low on that. He was extremely ineffective, even as like a pick and roll man finisher. Now, if he's playing with more of a real point guard, more of the floor space, though he was playing with a pretty decent summer league point guard, as we'll get to. He doesn't have like great explosion to go get an alley-oop or crush a tip dunk. Hands were not great. Hands weren't great on the defensive glass. He did do a lot of offensive rebounding, actually, which was way more. He had a pretty low offensive rebound rate in Australia, if memory serves. He was actually at 14 offensive rebounds in 4 games here, although he obviously wasn't able to put him back. And yeah, he just has no finishing craft, no power, only average explosiveness, no ability to use his body and get to the foul line. It's kind of, he'll sort of force up a floater is kind of the best he can do. Donovan Clingan just was like totally messing him up. That was the 0 for 15 game against Portland. So yeah, that didn't look great. Now the passing was there, 13 assists for this player type. I mean, if you want, maybe you can elaborate on that a little bit. If you wanted to throw some more.
I do. I think, and it's absolutely the best thing that Sarr does offensively. There was one where I actually think Sarr could be criticized for being too pass willing, where he was basically posting up a smaller guy, could have gotten a foul, was in semi-transition. Instead, he spent the time waiting for a pass. The pass came and the guy got a layup. So it's just like he could have done something more dominant himself, but he did create it. I thought that the passing vision was there. It's patience, it's understanding. So like I am genuinely intrigued by that. And I mean, I think there is a possibility. So he's not going to be like a Sabonis type hub, in part because Sabonis is a better like scorer. He draws fouls. I mean, Sarr can get to that point offensively. That'd be great. But there is another version of hub, which we've seen a little bit, where it's like the guy is as much of a scoring threat. Maybe in a way it's more like what Draymond Green has done at certain moments in time. It's just that they're just where the offense starts from. And I think that Sarr has the passing and in terms of mentality to potentially fill that role. And if he ever got the jump shot, that's a great counter in that because you can't sag off.
Yeah, he looked fine bringing the ball up as well. He looked to have that facility where he wasn't just like fumbling the ball all over the place. And then the other thing I'll point to is I think his defense was right about where I thought it would be. Sort of had 10 blocks in 4 games and definitely caused some problems for people. Like again, like the way he gets a lot of his blocks is if he's kind of standing up near the free throw line, someone gets below him, and as a help defender, he'll crash down and surprise people from behind. A couple of nice plays there. As a switch guy, again, it was about where I thought it would be, right? Like he wasn't getting roasted, but he also wasn't just like, oh, this guy has no chance of getting a shot off against. He's like, no, he's still going to kind of be there. He might get a block shot potentially if the guy tries to drive and force one up, but he's not, really cutting guys off. He's just kind of staying with them, using his length, like doing a decent job on the perimeter. Again, as I noted, they did a bunch of switching, so I think that's something that he can get better at as he gets stronger, learns the angles a little bit more. I don't think he's going to be absolutely dominating in that regard. But he's also someone who in a lot of systems against a lot of players, you would feel comfortable there. So I think defensively, he was just about exactly as advertised, including not being able to get a defensive rebound. So then I guess that we can shift back to this question of like, are you significantly lower on him after this performance?
Well, so for me, I mean, it is. I'll make mine brief because I gave it at the outline. I think that the isolation defense was mostly positive. There was one play where he gave up an easier drive to Muhammad Gay than I would have liked. And so it's like, that's again, more of a like-sized guy. You want to see him do well. But there was another one against the Kings. I don't think it was on Keenan. I think it was on Kobe Jones where he did shut it down better. Like the type of thing you want to see from Sarr. So the offensive game is a very real concern. And I think that the the lack of a calling card other than passing, like not being consistent around the basket, the jump shot not quite being there. I've never believed in Sarr's triple threat stuff. He did a fair amount of that at Perth, and I just don't think he has that in his game. It's, to me, his facility there is not like Jabari Smith's, for example. And so, like there's a threshold that you need to reach, and I don't think Sarr's there. You never want to rule it out for a guy this young, but I don't expect it. So defensively, about what I expected. That's important. Like reaching my expectations when my expectations are high is a very positive thing. But then, yeah, the offensive game is a concern. It's going to take time. And it is at the point right now where if the Wizards' goal was winning games this year, next year, that would be a problem.
Yeah, when we did our report on him, I felt like he would have a chance to be one of these guys who is more effective than the average fan believes, because the stuff that he's best at is not something that's necessarily going to show up a ton in the box score, or at least in a positive way, because 15 missed shot attempts does indeed show up in the box score. And I think my guess was that on an actual good team, his usage would be below 20%, and that he does have this skill level, but he doesn't really have much of a way to use it. And I don't think he just has quite the natural feel or touch for offensive basketball to where like you're going to be a guy you want creating shots for you. Now, of course, there's a chance because he has the skill level and he's young that maybe he would come in, the shackles are off, and he's going to show you more than expected. And obviously, other than in terms of aggressiveness, he showed us less. And so this isn't a surprising outcome, but it's also not a positive surprise. And so that does lower your evaluation a little bit, at least for now. So I still think, the jump shot is going to be the key swing factor. Is there a way to use some of this passing? Maybe the fact that is pretty good at making mid-rangers over a contest. That I think is going to be the difficult thing for him to try and figure out. But it's not a death knell, but you got to be lower on the idea that he could be more than we thought after this.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, that's completely fair, but I think it's more, he didn't like totally change things from my prior, just a lower version of that. I want you to start out with Bub Carrington because I was the guy who was beating the drum on him. I did more film on him. I wanted to see what you saw in him at Summer League, 5 games.
Number one thing that I was impressed by was just how much he was bombing it from 3. The rep was that he's going to come in and be more of a mid-range type of shooter, at which he was very good at. And I think, he looked comfortable taking the NBA 3 and got a lot of them off. And you didn't think because he was taking them off the dribble that these were necessarily bad shots. And so because he's not going to be an explosive guy getting to the basket and finishing, there's only so much of your life that you can make out of being mostly a mid-range jump shooter, particularly if you're not an unbelievable passer, which I thought he was fine, but he's not. I don't think he's fantastic in that regard. So your question about him is, well, what does he do to truly draw the defense? And I thought he showed some positive strides there that, this is a guy that you need to guard in the pick and roll near the 3-point line, and that maybe can open some more things up for himself or his teammates. So I thought that was a positive. And the rest of it, and just the fact that he looked comfortable, didn't look overwhelmed. If teams tried to pressure him, it wasn't an issue. In some of the games that they played, obviously like that Atlanta game, the opposition was switching. He was still able to get his shot off in those circumstances, even if he was not like a dominating isolation separator at this point in time. It may never be. So I thought it was, and he had moments where he was really cooking, other times where he was inefficient. The overall stats were pretty inefficient. That's always, I don't look at that as much as just how it looked like he was getting his shots. So I thought it was a solid summer league for him.
Same. And Carrington, the appeal, who for those who didn't track this, I had him 5th on my board, had him in the same tier with Risa Shea and Klingon, which is unusual for people. And the reason why I had that was that I thought there was a pathway to Carrington being a starter level point guard. I didn't think there was a ton of star potential. If he had been star potential, he would have been higher than 5th. But there just aren't that many starting caliber guys in this class, in my opinion. And we'll talk about whether that evaluation has changed or not, probably later in our summer league discussions. But for Carrington, like I think that it largely confirms him that he has good positional size. So his efficiency at Pitt was carried by his ridiculous shooting on pull-up twos, which actually did not happen in summer league. He was 1 of 12 on those overall in summer league. But the pull-up three was there, including there was a nice pull-up three in transition where he just took it with pure confidence, had his feet under him. And so overall, 14 of 39 on threes, 36%, mostly pull-ups. That's the kind of mix that you want. You like better than 33% from the field, of course, but he made his free throws as well. And there were a few times where like Carrington was able to really get some separation, was able to get something around get something that those looked good. And then there were a few stretches where it just kind of got lost in the shuffle a bit. There was also a frustrating stretch in that Hawks game where his chemistry with Sarr was awkward and they had a couple of weird turnovers. Like they didn't know what the other one was going to do, but it's the first game of summer league.
A lot of those were just with switching. He tried to just kind of like loft it up as Sarr was like rolling to the basket as the guy was switching onto him and had inside position. And that didn't go amazingly well.
It didn't. And while Synergy logged a lot of his possessions as pick and roll, this is a summer league quirk. They weren't like true pick and rolls in the NBA sense of like guy stands there, set, does the screen, and then do the action. It can be a little bit more free flowing. There are also a lot of slipped screens in summer league in some ways more than the NBA proper. But I thought that overall that was good. One frustration I've had with Carrington, both in the film and in the college film and in this, was that I wish he pushed harder in transition, whether he has the ball in his hands or not. He's not an unbelievable athlete, but he could apply that athleticism more. And I think that is something that could potentially come into play with the Wizards NBA team, where he presumably will play fewer minutes. And then it becomes like bust your ass while you're out there, because that's how you're going to stay out there.
Yeah, I would like to see more from him in transition. He's definitely not a like push the ball down your throat type of guy. I think another thing that was encouraging for him, because he is so thin, he didn't look like he was getting overpowered.
No.
A ton that might be different at the NBA level, but like they felt comfortable with him switching, and that wasn't a total disaster. 26 assists in 5 games, and I thought that was most effective in transition. He had a couple of times where he's able to get all the way to the rim and then kick out to a corner shooter. But again, with the amount of switching that was going on, he didn't have the greatest amount of chance to like play traditional pick and roll, get those traditional pick and roll reads. And then, the hit ahead pass was really good. He had one really nice one to Keyshawn George, where George was kind of trying to post up in transition. The guy in front of him, he lofted it over to George. I think it was for a foul.
I had that one in my notes too.
Yeah. So I think there's, like, he came in particularly because he actually just turned 19 yesterday. That's pretty solid. He got to the foul line for 4 attempts a game, which is more than, that was another perceived weakness of his. So just to come in at his age and make the transition to this next level, not look out of place, as a lot of point guards that young, and particularly ones who are not incredibly athletic, can get more threes up, get to the foul line. He was actually great on the defensive glass. He was almost 7 defensive rebounds a game, and got a few steals. Had a couple of blocks as well. So it was overall not incredibly efficient inside the arc, and he has a lot more work to do. But I don't see a future superstar here, but certainly someone that you believe could be a starter after seeing him here.
Yeah, and considering this class, like I feel good about being higher on him than the average person and the average like draft analyst, if we want to call it that way. So yeah, I mean that's where it goes. Keyshawn George was the other Wizards first round pick. They moved up from 26 to 24 to get him. Swiss born, played in 5 games, about 10 points, 4 rebounds. And again, another guy that I did film on in the 25. And it really, to me, was a similar story to what I saw in the film, which is that I don't like Keyshawn George on ball. I think that he's not physically dominant enough. He doesn't have quite that level of handle, or like he has good positional size depending on what position you define him as. But that means that it's all about the jump shot, and you never want to build too much off a small sample. But 10 to 21, that's 48% from 3, and so he's going to have to do that and he can be like a complementary facilitator, that type of stuff. I think that a lot of times you see guys who grew up as guards that shift into that role. And also, I still really, really don't like his defense. And so for George, I brought up a Cam Johnson comparison in the audio thing that I did for Dunc'd On Prime, and I think that it's he's a little bit of a different version. Is also significantly younger than Cam Johnson was when he became a pro. But it's the idea behind that is if the jump shot works, it works. He works as a player. If the jump shot doesn't work, then it's a big problem.
Yeah, and I think there's a decent chance of that, particularly with the volume that he was able to get up, hit some pretty tough step backs as well. You mentioned Johnson. I would certainly say he's not doesn't have that level of raw explosion when he really gets going that Cam Johnson does,
Sure.
getting to the basket, attacking a closeout. But I think that's an interesting comp. And George will turn 21 in December. My comp as I watched him was actually Torian Prince
Interesting.
as a guy who has pretty decent size, like Keyshawn George, 6'10" wingspan, 8'9" standing reach. That's very solid size for a three. And he get his shot off pretty well and make it, attack a closeout, but maybe not as athletic as he looks when he's just standing out there. And kind of more of an offensive forward who's kind of a shooter, and you hope that he can be passable with some of his physical tools defensively. I didn't find that his forays to the basket were particularly enticing for me just because he's, pretty average athlete uh, at this point in time. It showed like a little bit of ability to pass or, make a few plays. Like his handle for this, for his size is not awful, but you just wonder whether how effective he can really be finishing it inside. Not a guy you're really going to give the ball to for offense. As you noted, he's going to be more of an off-ball guy. I thought he had a few moments where he's more active just as a rotator on defense. Again, I think he's going to just be more of a passable defensive guy. So that's my evaluation on him. I think there are a lot of people who seem to like really dislike it. I'm like, if he's this size and can make shots, and he's not just like a terrible athlete, like seems like a pretty fine pick, especially given that he's not that old.
Yeah, we'll see on the athleticism part of it. And again, like I think this was of the guys that I scouted, this was a kind of a reasonable place for him to be taken. There were some who had him a little bit higher. The Wizards had a few other guys that I don't think we need to spend as much time on. Much maligned Johnny Davis, I would say, even though he was productive to an extent in the two games that he played in, I think that he didn't show me anything significantly new. There was a crazy moment in the Hawks game where he fired. I think it was that they were ahead and like they didn't need to take a shot, and he like fired a YOLO three and airballed it, and I went a little bit crazy. And so for somebody like Davis, the what we're looking for is, okay, this guy's been a disappointment so far. Is he showing something new? And there are some other guys that I want to talk about who did. But for me, Springer, I'm seizing the guy who did. Johnny Davis really didn't for me.
Yeah, he had a few moments where I thought he was actually playing effective basketball, which I had never seen that happen before. Like hit a couple of shots, was hustling, had a couple of drives. But I think that was in the Portland game, I want to say. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely for a guy who's now going into his third year and hasn't shown much. I wasn't like more intrigued. I think he's gotten better to the extent possible, but he had a long way to go given what his skill set was coming in. Should we move to Houston here?
Sure. I'll just brief notes. Patrick Baldwin Jr. only played a few
Yes.
minutes. He only played a few minutes. Didn't it's all about the 3-point shot. Didn't make his three in the limited amount he played. Didn't show a ton
he has
defensively.
to be such an for given his skill set, he has to be like an unbelievable shooter, and he's like an okay one.
And then Tristan Vucevic only played, who's on a two-way now. We normally wouldn't talk about that, but the curiosity was contract. He only played 15 minutes total, so he didn't play enough in summer league for us to talk about it.
All right, let's talk about the Houston Rockets and the apple of my eye, Reed Sheppard. First two games, he was unbelievable. Last two, he did kind of slow down. The minutes were actually, so the third game was the second night of a back-to-back, and they played him like 36 of the 40 minutes. Which I
think he played like the entire second half of that game. So like, what is going on?
And I mean, maybe they were just like trying to like, I think they'd won the first two. They were trying to like make the summer league playoffs. And then he played one more game after that in which he didn't shoot the three well. But, I thought, and I didn't see that last game. I watched all three of the first ones live because it was must see TV, especially after those first 2 games, and it just was very impressed by him in a number of facets. Defensively, I think much better than anticipated. If we kind of talk about what some of his perceived weaknesses were going to be, there weren't that many blow bys. I thought he was able to take better angles. Those were the things at Kentucky where he just was off the guy, and then the guy would just accelerate and go by him. They were doing a lot of switching as well. Houston pretty much did that exclusively with Orlando Robinson and Nafali Dante at the 5. And so Sheppard was able to hold up a little bit, and then they would usually kick him out if the guy tried to post him up. The defensive hands are definitely pretty remarkable. It
Yes.
seemed like maybe the scouting report on him the other way got out a little bit, that like he was going to be reaching it. But I've talked about this a lot defensively with guys like Doug McDermott, right? It's not even necessarily that his physical characteristics aren't that great and that he's getting blown by all the time. Although that certainly is an issue. It's that guys are just completely comfortable against a player. Like Duncan Robinson is another one of these guys. Completely comfortable. So you can say, okay, I'm going to make a move here. I'm going to cross over right to left. I'll get a little separation, and I know for sure that I can get my shot off there. You can basically like mentally prepare for what you're doing. And you can't do that against Reed Sheppard. Like if you're predictable, he's going to strip it. He's going to show up in places where you don't expect. He's a pretty good athlete. He'll get some good contests. He can even go vertical as a help defender sometimes. And so you always, like, sometimes those little quick reaches, like every time you put the ball around him, he's reaching. He almost fouled out of a game. Well, I wouldn't say almost fouled out. He would have fouled out if it was a real NBA game without 10 fouls, with a bunch of reaches. And like, he was getting caught on them. Like they were fouls most of the time. A few of them he didn't think they were. But he is going to just try to make a play on the ball every single time. And he's going to get in foul trouble as a result of that. He's going to have to modify those instincts a little bit. But I think for people who are like, oh, this guy's going to be like some atrocious defender at guard, like, no, he's going to be fine. And part of that is it's just, you can't just like put the ball out there in front of him. He's going to take it from you. So
Yeah, I mean,
he's not going to be like, some Trae Young level of defender. Like he's actually going to, and he's got a little bit of strength and athleticism. So I don't know if he's going to make guys uncomfortable, but he at least like makes you think twice before you're just going to go right through him.
yeah, he's not going to be cooked too much out there. I was more encouraged by some of what he did there than on the film. Like I thought he gave up too many drives, and that was better in the summer league film. And yeah, million deflections and rips. Credited with 2.8 steals and 1.3 blocks per game, which is crazy. But I think that actually undersold it a little bit. And as you said, there are consequences of that in terms of fouls and everything else. And then for Sheppard on the offensive end, I mean, reaching 56% true shooting when his 3-ball wasn't falling, was 5 of 18 in those 4 games. That's 28%. I would say there are some encouraging stuff there. And so for me, Sheppard on the offensive end, it was a mix of positive and negative. So the positive for me, the biggest one, was that his finishing was better than I thought. 13 to 16 at the rim, had 3 dunks, didn't really make his runner. But I didn't see anything wrong with it. It was just, there was a little bit there. So that was a positive. And then the negative, which is what I expected, is that Sheppard doesn't quite have the shake or the pop athletically, like the shake in his handle or the pop athletically to like be a dominant, like one-on-one kind of pick and roll guy. It is going to need the jump shot or like a Steven Adams level screener. Good thing Steven Adams is on his NBA team to really get him open in that sense. Like he's going to be one of those two things, but that's something I expected. Like it's again, the idea of like, are you going to defy what I saw in the film beforehand? So the finishing he was better on the finishing. And then the other part was more of a confirmation.
I thought he looked pretty good the couple of times that he tried to go one-on-one in the games that I watched to be able to get separation. He also, especially going up against the switching defense, he favors this like big looping crossover that covers a lot of ground horizontally, and he can do it right to left or left to right. And I noticed this on the college film too, that he's just very good at like seeing when a guy is leaning one way and going the other way, just using someone's momentum against him. And so even when the other team was switching, he was able to get separation and get it in the lane at the point of attack pretty well in those circumstances. The other thing that I think I didn't hear talked about much that I was actually very high on, I'm sure a lot of people rolled their eyes when I was talking about him having like a Jerry West-esque mid-range jumper. And I thought that actually really did translate. Like times when he would be snaking the pick and roll, getting near the right elbow, rising up.
I have the stats on that.
Yeah, let's hear it.
12 of 20, 60% on pull-up twos.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and some of those were floaters too. His floater game looked pretty good. Same hand. He favors like a right hand floater off his right foot most often. But to be able to, especially if like you talked about, say with Steven Adams, setting him a screen, if he can snake back, and I thought he showed a little bit more handle in kind of getting to spots in pick and roll than anticipated. And then Tim Legler talked about this on the broadcast. I said he really gets off the ground quickly. Tim was saying like he's getting great elevation on those shots too, which he had a really good angle to see, sitting at that courtside table. And so he's able to get that shot off, and it doesn't matter how contested it is. Like you have to block it or it's going in. Yeah, and particularly if he's going to his right, he's very comfortable with that. So that's another thing that if you're going to play a conventional pick and roll defense, I didn't think his 3-ball was like unbelievable. I was actually like slightly disappointed in that. I'd say I know he didn't shoot it that well, but just in terms of like the level of kind of like bombing and volume, and particularly his off-ball game, like he doesn't really have a great idea of like how to set up screens. Like he's kind of just getting like locked up off the ball or top-sided and like couldn't really do anything about it. So he's going to need to really improve that aspect of his game. But as like a pick and roll player, I think he has this bread and butter in terms of that mid-range jumper that he can always kind of get to that you're going to need to respect.
Absolutely. And the other stuff can fit together. And you brought up the kind of the understanding. One of my favorite things about Sheppard offensively in the film was that he has a really good feel of when to shoot and when to drive the closeout. He doesn't have the setup in terms of how to get to the place where you're getting closed out yet, but he has that part, like the decision-making element of it. And it's watching the guys leaning and everything else. Like he gets to that right. And when you are a more limited athlete, that is something you need to do. You need to think the game. You need to be prepared, shot prep, think the game faster, because that's how you can generate more of a window for yourself. And so I didn't think that his passing vision was incredible, like in the Kentucky film, better in transition, the hit aheads and all that type of stuff. And some of Sheppard's turnovers were, which he had 4.8 turnovers per game, but he had the ball in his hands a ton. They were like the kind of autopilot ones to bigs and pick and roll, where it's a little bit floaty, just kind of like, oh, this is what I'm supposed to do.
His passing speed is very poor, right? Like
yes.
if this was Tecmo Super Bowl, he'd be getting a lot of passes picked off, and part of that is just being a little bit smaller of stature. But if he doesn't have like a lob pass, he just needs to really get some more steam on these passes and probably just get a little stronger core and like find a way to really gun these looks, because he would make the right decision a lot of times, but then the pass would get floated and the defense would be right there once it arrived, or it would kind of get deflected a little bit or something. So he's got to get better there. But I would say I thought his vision overall was totally solid. I was higher on that than you, so perhaps it's just self-fulfilling prophecy for me.
We'll have that with more than a few prospects, to be sure.
But I thought he showed very good feel for the game, made a lot of like very nice, but in comparison to say Carrington, I would say his passing was much better than him.
I would say better, not much better, but that's
okay.
It's part. That's,
now Reed was more of a threat. I mean, the biggest thing is in that third game against the Pistons. They're reacting to him. They're putting two on the ball. Like they saw what he did in the first two games. They're like, we got to take it out of his hands. And I thought it was a little concerning that he didn't get up as many threes, maybe, as I would have liked. You're hoping that a guy like this is going to be getting up, like 8-9 threes per 36 or something. But
and he, unlike almost everybody, he actually almost played 36 minutes a game in Summer League.
Yeah, I think so. So the one thing I would point to is his usage was pretty high. You did note the turnovers, but 27% usage. It was below 20 at Kentucky, and a lot of people were like, "Well, he just is. How can he really create that many shots?" I'm like, yeah, I think he can. Like, I definitely believe that. And like, okay, if maybe he's not at the point yet where, all right, if you're putting your entire defense towards stopping him, that he's going to still be able to create a lot of shots for you. But like, that's the fact that he even is causing that reaction at this level is impressive. And, as you noted, he was able to be efficient. Still doesn't really get to the line, doesn't get all the way to the basket. A couple times he tried that. He got blocked from behind. He doesn't have a great feel for finishing just on like standard layups. He had a couple of dunks in transition on runouts, obviously. So there were some stretches where he was just like making every play on offense and defense in those first two games where you're just like, I sort of, when we were sitting on Nerd Row there where we all of us dorks sit, I was like, okay, like when are they trading Fred VanVleet? And obviously that's a little bit too, we're ahead of ourselves at least a little bit here. But I was very impressed. I think this guy's gonna be really good. I was glad that I had him number one on my board, and he's gonna have to find a way to get his shot off more, still adjust the NBA 3-point line more. But I was just really, really excited about that. I think he was just an incredible watch as well. I think people are gonna really, really like watching this guy.
The top rookie performer at Summer League for me, absolutely.
Yeah, no, I think if most people would say like, yeah, this guy is like obviously the best prospect in the draft coming out of Summer League. He had a great chemistry with Cam Whitmore, and Cam, at least his first two games, was just getting in for some absolutely nuclear dunks, and like, had some big blocks as well. Reed would run pick and roll or in transition. Cam would cut along the baseline and just crush some absolutely nuclear dunks. Like, he looks even more athletic than he did last year, I thought. And he also, I kind of thought he and GG Jackson were the guys who had like some of the worst shot selection in the league last year. And I thought that Cam chilled on that
sometimes. There were a few where he got a little bit aggressive. 26 usage for Whitmore in his 3 games, and it's funny you brought up GG Jackson. We're not covering him in this pod, but I have some thoughts on him too. But Whitmore also, I think it would have looked a little bit better. Like it galled me at times if he shot better than 1 of 14 from 3. We have a much larger sample for Cam Whitmore as a shooter. We don't need to lean on that too much. But when you're taking these threes and they just miss, maybe it just bothers me a little bit more. But yeah, I thought that when he did things within the flow of Houston's offense, I thought that it looked totally good. It looked like you brought up the 2-point finishing and all that type of stuff, and got to the line 19 times in 3 games. Like, I think that all those things were plenty good. Like, I don't think that Whitmore showed me anything new, but I thought he did do a good job, other than the 3-pointer, of reminding me why I liked him in the first place.
Yeah, and that Pistons team played really good defense in that third game that he played when he really struggled. I think it was like 1 for 12 or something like that in that third game, and they did a nice job on reading that game too. And so when he did try to go one-on-one, I didn't think he had necessarily the moves to get great separation. And I thought he also had, a few of these kind of space cadet moments on the defensive end as well. But so it wasn't like he just, with his athleticism, he plays hard. He wants to go in and dunk everything. He wants to make plays. I mean, that is an incredible currency just in and of itself.
Yes.
What does that become? How does he fit in with another kind of similar guy in Tari Eason, who missed all of last year in Houston? And, is Cam going to be a guy you can give the ball to? I thought he had a few decent pick and roll reps, finding the roll man like Orlando Robinson for like little floaters near the dotted line. So he's had like some nice little bounce pocket passes. So showed some ability to do more off the dribble. I still, other than like a great transition player and, hopefully a guy who's going to hit shots, and just because he's so athletic can just generate shots at the basket and just in ways that a lot of guys can't, because we noted, right? Like, he's actually like surprisingly efficient last year. He's like 27% usage for a lot of the year. And, but is he doing that by like, taking kind of like jump shots off the dribble from 3? Like, I still don't quite believe there, even though the numbers on that weren't atrocious, if memory serves, last year. So I like, he came in and did what he needed to do, had some really good games, had some dominant stretches, and I hope that as Dylan points out in the comments, he just turned 20 2 weeks ago, and also like there are some issues with his knee. He's made it through now. He still is looking very athletic. That's supposedly why he fell, is maybe knee issues. So he hasn't, and I think he's at least like turned the dial down on the crazy shit like a little bit over the past year. Yeah. So that's, I think, he definitely is making solid progress. I still don't have an amazing feel of it. So like, because is he going to be, sort of like a Jonathan Kuminga type of player? Like, is that where he's heading? I think he was compared to him, for example. I don't think he quite has the size of Kuminga. I don't think Whitmore is like a guy who can play the 4, maybe like Kuminga can, but
Yeah, and I don't think
a lot
Whitmore
of
has
intrigue.
I don't think he has the defensive chops, especially his off-ball awareness is always going to be a little, or it's a limitation for now. I can't say it always will
Yeah,
be.
but he does get a lot of steals, and he's like
Yeah,
generally more aggressive than someone like Kuminga as well.
that's fair.
I mean, you're never going to be like, oh yeah, he's not using his athleticism with Cam Whitmore,
True.
right? And that athleticism is pretty major.
It is. The other Hawk, Hawk, that's his former team, on Rocket on a guaranteed contract. AJ Griffin, 16th pick in 2022, traded for the 44th pick this year. And Griffin played in 5 games. Three ball wasn't falling at the rate you'd like. It was 7 to 25 in those 5 games. Attempt rate, 5 per game is totally reasonable there. My favorite play that Griffin had, he had a nice tip dunk in their first game. That was impressive. Had more pop there vertically than I necessarily expected. Had some steals, but like the hope for me at one point with Griffin, who I was a little bit higher, if memory serves, than some people on him in the draft process, is that summer league could be an opportunity for him to like show like, oh yeah, that's right, I am an NBA player. Had this super weird year with the Hawks where I was sidelined and everything else, but I can play. And like, I think that this wasn't quite that showing out that I was hoping for. Not that he was terrible, but it's just like you want a 30-year guy to be like, oh yeah, there's a pathway for him to be a rotation guy.
With the way that he shoots the 3, he's never going to be a super high volume guy. So could he be one of these guys, kind of more of a Grayson Allen guy? He's also not like a huge volume guy, but he shoots an incredible percentage like he did at Duke. And you thought in his first year too, maybe he's showing some signs of that when he did get a few rotation minutes. And then he had a disastrous summer league. Last year, he was 7 to 25 from 3 here. And because, he's just not going to really shoot it on the move. So, I mean, that's 5 attempts a game, mostly as an off-ball guy. And then when he tries to attack off of those closeouts, he's not really like a good 1-foot finisher. He's not quick enough to get separation. It's a lot of kind of having to deactivate into more of like a power move. And he's strong, but he can't do that against NBA defenders, like overpower them as, kind of a big shooting guard type of guy. We're not talking about like Anthony Edwards here. And so he's just, the sine qua non for him is he has to be like a 40% 3-point shooter, like reliably. And that just hasn't really come through since early on in his career. And that, is one of the big reasons that the analytics translations liked him so much. Only 4 assists in 5 games as well. And I didn't think he looked overwhelmed defensively. And he does have a strong body, but it just was not like, he didn't do anything well in the summer league, right? Like, I mean, that's what it boils down to for a third-year guy.
And then you can compare him to Nate Williams, who's on a 2-way with the Rockets, who was the 22 draft class, like AJ Griffin, but has bounced around a little bit, Blazers and Rockets, where I thought like he really did show something. He was a better 3-point shooter until the last game, and like had a good wraparound pass, had a pick 6 in the Laker game. Like Williams, you saw like, oh, okay, there's some stuff here. And like I walked away from it being like, oh yeah, there maybe they have something with him, even if I'm a little bit less sold on AJ Griffin.
All right, well, I think that's probably a good chance to stop here. Obviously, we won't spend as much time on all of these lower guys, but for guys who are drafted at the top, we want to really hit on it because we do have a bunch of news that we need to get to. Want to just see if there are any comments that we can hit on here. Some of these on guys who are later in the draft, I think we'll save those. Philip, we should have got to this when we were talking about Reed. He says, what do you think of Reed's ability to pressure the rim? Can he get by with a strong floater game? To be an effective pointer, does he need to get all the way to the rim and finish? I would like to see that a little bit, or at least a little bit of foul drawing. I think the fact that they have toughened up the foul drawing on those sort of plays where you're running alongside the guy and you kind of wrong foot him, he's not in legal guarding position, and throw your body into him, like that's going to make things more difficult for him. He certainly can be an effective point guard. I mean, I think he was in summer league, even though he wasn't getting all the way to the basket. And a lot of point guards are not going to be, like great finishers at the rim. I think that he has enough gravity and enough touch that, unlike a lot of guys, he can just be effective enough on floaters. Like, would I like to see him develop a little bit more kind of a hook shot, craft game, something along the lines of what Steph Curry has, high off the backboard, spin, all that stuff? Yes. But, that's if he's going to be a superstar, he's going to need to get something at the rim. But if he's going to be like a very solid player, or maybe even an all-star, I'm not sure that that's required. Now he's going to have to shoot an amazing percentage from three and from mid-range, but that's part of the appeal, that I think he can do that. And he still has enough gravity from those areas to unlock more passing and force the defense to guard him, even if he's not creating a 5-alarm fire right at the basket. So I think it'd be really nice, but it's not a necessity for him because the rest of his skill set is so good.
Yeah, I agree with all that. And I'll note, just going through the other comments, a lot of them are about players that we will discuss at a future time, and we will save our analysis for that future time. Some of them I need to watch more film on and everything else. You have to balance everything out like this. Like, for example, Dillingham and Bazelis and all that. We'll talk about those guys. We're just not going to do it right now.
Yeah, these are some good questions. Please, if you're in the next one of these, you can, or actually, John and I will probably do one talking about Summer League soon. So sorry we can't get to those. We are limited by the subjects we're talking about right now. Where are we starting here news-wise?
I think we could start with Evan Mobley actually getting the extension done with the Cavs. It is the standard 5-year, 25% max that goes up to the 30% max. If he qualifies, we don't know the specific verbiage on what that means. How high does he go if he gets all NBA or defensive player of the year? But it'll be significant. And so for Cleveland, it clarifies their financial future along with the Donovan Mitchell move. Now we can see if anything happens with Jared Allen. I don't expect an extension there. And with Mobley, we discussed this in our offseason grades because we've already graded the Cavs offseason that this was expected. And Mobley for me was not a no-brainer max, but was one where I think that he would have gotten this as an offer sheet probably with a non-injured normal season.
Yeah, I ran out of time while you were talking to find the. Oh yeah, here we go. I'll just play it now.
Hey, happy 4th of July weekend, everyone. Nate here, just doing a solo pod. Since so little has happened, I decided to just give Danny the night off. Nothing incredibly sexy has occurred so far. There's the biggest stuff really is like, hey, what else are you doing, right? Like this, you're still.
Yeah, okay. So that was me playing my solo Franz Wagner reaction pod, because just replay that one for my feelings on this Mobley deal. And you mentioned it clarifies their financial future in the sense that, yes, they know how much they're going to be paying him, but I think it muddies it in the sense of just how are you going to keep these 4 guys? And then also, by the way, you still don't have a guy that you love at the 3 with this group. Now, I think that this move makes it more likely that Jared Allen in particular will have to get traded, but there was no reason to do this right now. And we saw the Cavs are another one of these kind of high in their own supply. We're a small market. We got to take our victory lap anytime we get someone to stay here or want to be here. And so we'll just throw in the max that we can. Like, going back to the ultimate example of that in Cavs history with this regime, by the way, is the Kevin Love extension. It's like, oh, he really wants to be here. So I was like, no, that was a terrible contract that really hamstrung them over the years in terms like they never were able to do things with this rebuild, like taking on bad salary for draft picks or anything like that. And they ended up getting Evan Mobley and Darius Garland. Those 2 guys hit, and they made a great trade for Jared Allen. Like the rebuild ended up working out well, but it just limits your future optionality for a guy that we don't know is going to be worth it. Like the guys where I'm like, and they have a salary structure where they have a bunch of other mouths that they have fed or are going to need to feed in the future. Like, it makes you think like, man, how on earth could they possibly be paying Evan Mobley a max and also retain Jared Allen and also be paying Darius Garland and Donovan Mitchell, or guys that you trade those guys for as well? And so this is just kind of locking them into this financial future. And like, okay, would paying Evan Mobley $5 million less a year really change things that much? Like, maybe it could, honestly, especially when you're dealing with the second apron and those consequences, which no one enjoys. So I think ultimately there's no reason to do this now. And you could always just give him a maximum qualifying offer in free agency next year if you had to. Like, there's like Evan Mobley is just not one of these guys where I'm like, oh man, what if he's like, a top 5 player in the league and we're going to lose him 9 years from now, or sorry, not after the 9th year of his career. I mean, it's just not a realistic concern for me.
The shorthand with this for me is how much worse is a 3+1? So 3 new years plus a player option versus a 5. And in Evan Mobley's case, I'm not sitting there like, oh
no
no,
one's going to give him that anyway. There have been I think there's been 2 instances of such a contract being given out in restricted free agency ever. And one was to Gordon Hayward. And that was because his team still didn't want to pay him at that time. And he had other max offers. Like, if you get to the point where Evan Mobley obviously has other max offers, you just pay him the 5-year max next offseason.
Yeah, of course.
And the other one was Otto Porter, which was atrocious.
It really was. And so yeah, I agree with you. And I think that teams have been too aggressive with these. And some of the ones I've criticized before have worked out reasonably well. I invoked De'Aaron Fox for that. We can move on a piece of
and quickly, just one more thing again.
Sure.
People, since this is a public pod, people might not have heard this, that I was totally on board with the Cade extension. And probably the LaMelo one too. And it's like, well, that's because that's the first guy. That's the guy that's going to be kind of setting your culture. And there isn't very much opportunity cost to it. With Franz, with Evan Mobley, paying a guy who you don't know for sure is going to be an all-star, the 25% max, when you don't have to, when there's truly an opportunity cost in that you need to either hold on to another near all-star level player in Jared Allen, or find a 3, or in the Magic's case, find another like high-level offensive player to go with Franz and Paolo. If you really want to be a championship contender, like, this move to me makes it harder for the Cavaliers to potentially build a fully championship contending roster.
I agree.
Okay, sorry about that, but I wanted to make sure I made all those points, because a lot of people might be like, oh, like, how are you okay with Cade, but you're not okay with Mobley? It's most of it is just the team context,
the situation. And so a disagreement we had that we were curious to see how it was going to work out was with the structure of Miles Bridges' contract. It is descending, which is what I had advocated for. So 27.2 this year, 27.5 year 2, 22.8 year 3. The trade-off there is that it makes it harder to extend off of that, depending on where Bridges and his team, whether it's the Hornets or someone else, are at that juncture. The benefit is that it uses more spending power when the Hornets have it, makes the contract more tradable moving forward. Just a note. And it appears, I haven't gone through separately modified all the machinations myself. I'm mostly leaning on Spotrac with this. They do great work. It looks like both the Hornets and the Magic were able to structure their transactions in such a way that they have the room exception still. In the Hornets case, we thought that they might have to use it on Reggie Jackson. It appears they did not. That could be wrong. It could be just the logging that there's something else there. I don't know. The Hornets are going to use it even if they have it, but I wanted to mention that they do potentially still have that spending power. They have it, the Magic do. And then we know that the Oklahoma City Thunder do, because that was pretty obvious by their transactions.
Yeah, not going to talk Team USA. I was at a family reunion this weekend, so I didn't get to see the game against South Sudan. They're playing, as we're talking right now, against Germany. What else do we have to talk about here in terms of the NBA?
We got one trade, and then we got one sort of trade. So the actual trade was the Memphis Grizzlies moving on from Zaire Williams, the 10th overall pick in 2021, and it cost them a 2030 second to get off of him. They traded that for Mami Diakite, who had previously gone to the Nets in the Mikal Bridges trade. And so for Memphis, they used that second round pick to offload Williams to clear $6.1 million for the 24-25 season. So now they have plenty of room under the luxury tax in the first apron. But what are they going to do with that? Luke Kennard is still sitting out there. The expectation is that they will bring him back. That hasn't actually happened. The players that would have made sense for the Grizzlies on the mid-level exception have basically all signed somewhere else. So this is it's a pretty big blemish of one of what look like they may be many on the Grizzlies' recent draft record. And so to move off of Williams before his rookie scale contract is done, for not only for nothing, but to give up a pick for it, it's not a massive deal, but he was the 10th overall selection.
Yeah, and recall, that they actually took on Eric Bledsoe's contract to move up from 17 to 10.
That's right.
And they also traded Valanciunas for Steven Adams, which actually was an upgrade for them. I think probably most people at the time didn't think that. They thought actually New Orleans was the one upgrading. That was not the case. However, and then of course the 17th pick became Trey Murphy III, who would look pretty fucking good in the Grizzlies uniform. And of course, Zaire Williams. And they wanted someone who had maybe a little bit more defensive ability. Williams, his last 2 years have kind of been ruined by health. I thought, it's always rough when a guy that young, his first year is by far his best one. I was really excited about him when he was playing at a rotation type of level as a rookie and actually helping. So really a shame. I think a good gamble for the Nets to take on him. And this is the type of move that they made back when they were rebuilding. They know how to do this playbook extremely well, and they're able to find a lot of guys and make players out of them. So Williams could possibly be that. I don't think he's going to get extended or anything unless he comes into camp and he's just like looking great. Maybe there's some injury issues still with him as well, but the Nets also have a renowned medical staff that can maybe help him get back on track a little bit. So this is only a 1-year commitment anyway.
It is, and as somebody who's not particularly high on the Nets' current young talent, getting somebody else in there, I don't know.
Now this could be one of those ones where it's like we found out 4 days later they just waived him.
Yeah, sure, totally could happen. And briefly, because the Grizzlies and Zach Lowe, I appreciate that he had this in a piece talking about like the Grizzlies are the team that gets forgotten in like the top mix because they were arguably the second best regular season team in the Western Conference the 2 years before they got killed by injury suspension. They have had this really rough run of second round picks. So they got Ja, and of course, then they succeeded with Desmond Bane. But the other ones around there, Zaire Williams, 10th and 21.
Yeah, first and second round picks, I guess, right? Remember they even, because I think you said second round picks, but yeah.
Oh, first, yeah. So Zaire Williams was 10th and 21. Jake LaRavia was 19th and 22. Roddy 23rd and 22. They didn't have a first in 23 because of the Marcus Smart deal. So really, like, Santi Aldama, whether how you feel about him, and like even Xavier Tillman was a first rounder that we liked. That didn't work out for the Grizzlies. He is now, of course, a Boston Celtic. So even just getting a couple of rotation players out of those spots would have been huge for the Grizzlies. And now they have to try to piece that together. And that in concert with them not using their mid-level so far, maybe bringing back Luke Kennard. It's like as good as they are, hitting on one or two of those picks would have made them even better.
All right, breaking news here. And I was going to talk about this anyway, but the NBA did indeed finalize their TV agreements. And we've talked about the nature of those previously, but TNT has decided that they are going to try to match Amazon's package, which is for only $1.8 billion. That is within their budget. TNT didn't seem like they had the cash to get into the mid twos, which is where NBC ended up. And there's some interesting reporting. Bill Simmons talked about this over the weekend, that this is one of these, it's like a front loaded contract from Amazon that basically has all these poison pills in it where they're, I think, going to play the cash. Like, Bill wasn't that specific about like pay the cash.
5.4 billion in escrow reportedly.
Yes. Okay. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So that would be the first 3 years probably. So now does that, what Warner Discovery is going to try to say is just like, all we have to do is pay you $1.8 billion. That's it. Like, we have now matched. And the NBA is going to say, no, actually matching is like all of these different things. It means paying on the exact same date that Amazon was going to pay, and they're going to have the exact same reach. And this is part of this is international. Like, you guys don't have that kind of ability. And not having actually seen the language of that clause, I cannot tell you whether that's going to be successful. Generally, though, courts will say, well, you guys put this thing in there for a reason. And, I'm not that up on, I'm guessing it'll probably be New York law that this is going to be under contractual law in New York. And like, are they going to get into what the drafter's intent was, and like emails around this and all that. I mean, but one thing I do think is the case, and also I don't know whether it's arbitration or whether it's going to be a lawsuit, is the NBA going to just say, okay, you can match? Are they going to negotiate and carve out something else for them? Are they going to pay them a little bit to go away? But the NBA clearly does not want to be on TNT, even if they do match it. They want to be with Amazon. And part of the reason they want to do this is to be with, get the additional reach that Amazon has and particularly worldwide compared to what TNT Warner Discovery has. So I think this is going to be a fight. It's going to be interesting. I don't know whether it's going to play out in public or arbitration. I'll tell you this, the NBA absolutely does not want, nor did the networks want, the entirety of these agreements to become public, which they in almost all likelihood would if there is a lawsuit on this. So I think this is going to get settled in some way. The statement from Warner Discovery sounded like, oh yeah, of course, these are our rights. We're just matching them. All right, see you in fall 2025 NBA. We don't anticipate any sort of issues like that. Our contract says this. It's completely indisputable. And so that that's what you do publicly. This is all now under a legal microscope, and I'm really looking forward to the drama. Hopefully, you guys don't think this is too boring. I would be absolutely drooling all over my computer if these agreements actually become public and I can read them. But I don't think anyone wants that to happen. And if it's an arbitration, it won't either. So yeah, that'll or maybe someone will leak them at this point too. That could happen. That could be like revenge from Warner Discovery. Who knows? I'm really excited to see how this plays out. This is it's going to take a while, I think. Because I surely the next step will be the NBA saying, no, actually, you're not allowed to do that.
Yeah, and fortunately for the practicalities of this, it's more than a year until this actually kicks in because it's for the 25-26 season. So there's a lot of time for it to resolve, whether that is a formal adjudication, a settlement, or something else like that. So we have time for this to go. And like you, I will be very intrigued on what we find out during the process from here to resolution. I expect it will be less than we'd like it to be, but that's just the way it often goes.
Yeah. Now, as far for most fans, other than just what it's going to be on, and actually, it's probably in the short term better for fans who have cable to just not have to also pay for Amazon.
Sure.
And the NBA is going to get their money regardless, it would seem like at this point. So in terms of like what the salary cap is, how much the players are going to be paid, at least under this agreement, probably not going to change that much. But certainly, I think everyone other than TNT wants the NBA to be on Amazon instead of TNT.
It certainly appears that the NBA wants it that way, and
including me, because Amazon is going to do a better job than TNT. I thought they did a bad job, other than inside the NBA.
Back to kind of like the transactional news. Sam Hauser and the Celtics agreed to a 4-year, $45 million extension that will kick in for the 25-26 season that we were just discussing. This will cover Hauser's 27, 28, 29, and 30 age seasons. So it'll be kind of the remainder of his prime. And I wondered a little bit about whether this was going to happen with when they brought in Baylor Shireman. But considering where the cap is going up 10% a year for the foreseeable future, I think this is a very reasonable contract for Hauser. I have no guarantees that he will stay on the Celtics for the remainder, but paying a rotation level player about $10 million a year is going to look a whole lot more palatable a year or two from now for those who are like maybe a little bit sticker shocked by this.
It is still funny and I think this is totally good money for him, of just how teams are generally just willing to pay more in extensions than they are in free agency. I mean, there's not a huge age difference between like Sam Hauser and Derek Jones Jr. or Caleb Martin, and like those guys were starters on like finals level teams. Sam Hauser probably not a guy who can be a starter. I mean, his defense is reasonable, but that job as a 3-4 is you got to be one of your best defenders. He's a very good bench player, and this pays him appropriately for that. Nonetheless, this will skyrocket that Celtics tax bill again. But generally, if you can get a good player on a good contract, you take that opportunity and you figure it out later. We've learned that lesson many times, that it's better to do that than to just lose a guy who would be unrestricted. And also, he provides a potentially important matching salary for next summer. Al Horford is going to be a free agent next summer. He might even be retired by then. And this would be kind of their only, with that 5-man core, their only disposable salary in a potential trade that makes 8 figures. So, but he's a good player. I'm glad he was able to get paid. This is about where it should have ended up, given his skill set as, a solid, I guess you want to call him a third forward. And he's a lot better than Obi Toppin, who got paid more than him, I would say, for example. And he's a guy who also, due to his shooting, can fit in on 18.
Yeah, I think that's completely fair. We can move to a curiosity that hasn't made our air, but something that I think you and I were both monitoring off of it, which is the Sasha Vezenkov situation.
No, we talked about it, I think.
Okay, well, the shorthand for just a little bit was that it became abundantly clear that he wanted to play for Olympiacos. He'd, of course, played in Europe before joining the Sacramento Kings, but was under contract for once the Kings traded to the Raptors along with Davion Mitchell, and basically had agreed to a contract with Olympiacos, but was still under contract with Raptors. And so we kind of wondered how that situation was going to clarify. And what happened is Vezenkov gave all of his money back. He was going to make $6.7 million with the Raptors this year. He is giving all of that back and is going to play for Olympiacos. Yeah,
good deal for the Raptors, particularly because they got paid to take him.
Right.
And they also
think
got
about that
off
trade.
Jalen McDaniels as well, who they clearly didn't want, given how little he played a year ago. So that was a really good deal. I think it's going to be 5 years, 17 million euros. Who knows anything about European contracts and how guaranteed they are going to be or whatever. With Olympiacos, he just really wanted to go back there. Hated his NBA experience, it seemed like, and he'll join a list of some guys in Europe that you wish you could have seen. Like Vasilis Spanoulis only spent 1 year here. He's one of the best players in European history. Vezenkov isn't quite at that level to me, but he still is a guy who was the MVP. He's never going to be a guy who's going to create a ton of offense. I would have loved to actually see him on this Raptors team. I would have liked to see him used more at the Kings. He did have an ankle issue, but obviously his defense and his defensive fit with Sabonis in particular was not great. So I think he's an NBA level player. He didn't shoot it amazingly well in his first year, but he does some things I would have liked to see. He's a fun player, so I'm kind of sad that he's going back, but at least he'll be happy.
Yeah, and I'm glad that he gets to be where he wants to be. And the Raptors now, they're about $7 million below the tax line. Will they use some of that? Maybe they will. What could they potentially do with it? That'll be something. There aren't that many mid-level exception-y guys left, but they have the money. They could also, of course, use that in a trade if they want to. Another transaction that we've been waiting on is that the Clippers, it was reported that they were bringing in Chris Dunn for a while, but it hadn't happened. And the presumption was like, maybe that's going to fold into something else. And that is in fact what occurred. It became a sign and trade with Chris Dunn going from the Jazz to the Clippers in exchange for Russell Westbrook. The Clippers also give the Jazz a second round swap and cash in the deal. That is their way off of Russell Westbrook's contract. Dunn is getting a 3-year, $17 million contract. We do not know, at least I haven't seen how much of that is guaranteed, because with a sign and trade, only the first year is required to. You can guarantee more, like the Raptors did with
if he's getting paid over $5 million a year, I would be surprised if there's anything guaranteed beyond the first year.
Because it seems like that's kind of a little, not a balloon payment, but something more in that Friday versus, because I mean, he was on a 1-year minimum, or was on a minimum with the Jazz last year. So we'll see with that. And then this was the way for the Clippers to get off of Russell Westbrook. So he gets bought out for the second time.
The Nuggets won that game at Chicken, right?
They most definitely did. And so the Clippers gave up that second round pick swap to get off of Westbrook. The Jazz buy out Russell Westbrook for the second time in 2 years, and then he can make his way. He hasn't yet technically cleared waivers, though he will, to the Denver Nuggets. And so Denver only has to pay him the 2-year veterans, what it gets on their books for the cap and the taxes, the 2-year veterans minimum, rather than his full contract with the Clippers, or even technically speaking, the 1-year veterans amount that he'll actually make, because they get subsidized by the league. So the Nuggets win on that portion of the transaction. And the Clippers, I mean...
Well, can we just talk about how amazing it is that not only Russell Westbrook, but Reggie Jackson have been salary dumped to the exact same team twice in an 18-month period.
It's incredible.
Like Reggie Jackson to the Hornets and Russell Westbrook to the Jazz, and Westbrook and the Clippers were involved in 2 of the 4 dumps as well. That it's just amazing.
It is incredible. And the Clippers now, they're looking like they're going to be over. They're going to start the season over the tax, their first tapered hard cap due to their transactions. And there are lots of ways, including a PJ Tucker thing. Like maybe they'll do a wave and stretch on him or a trade eventually there. But so I would be stunned if the Clippers do that, in part because of the repeater and everything else. Even if it's Steve Ballmer's money, it's like, might as well just like get out by a little bit. Teams in this situation almost always do. But, the Clippers we'll have to see there.
Yeah, well, I'm glad they were able to address their lack of shooting by signing Chris Dunn.
Yes, yeah, that one of our big criticisms of their offseason definitely bears some truth there. And then
and Dunn's a good player. Like he's not like a terrible guy to have as your backup point guard. He's kind of duplicative with Terrence Mann. But yeah, you just wonder. They're probably a pretty decent bet to be the lowest 3-point volume team in the league by like quite a bit.
It's pretty incredible how it was 3 years ago that they had like arguably the greatest shooting season of all time, and that now they're
21.
That now they're one of the weakest shooting teams in the league.
Yeah, now maybe KPJ and Harden will like get enough up that they won't be the lowest. But yeah, it is pretty remarkable. Yeah, let's talk about this Trent move. We probably should have gotten to it earlier because it's clearly going to start for them, you would think. And as much as I haven't been too high on the great Trent Jr. experience, like he has been a guy who's been a starting shooting guard on a playoff team before, to get him for the straight minimum in Milwaukee, which of course is all they could offer, but not even a 1+1. It sounds like that is outstanding work by the Milwaukee Bucks.
It is. And while I am not the biggest fan of Gary Trent Jr., I am a fan of him at the minimum. And it seems like the Bucks were able to kind of get another Malik Beasley here, meaning a player who is more accomplished than would normally take the minimum, but didn't have better offers or didn't have significantly better offers where he thought this was an opportunity, and playing time on a squad that has the potential to compete for a conference finals and or NBA finals. Like that is a different opportunity than some of the other ones can do. And so Gary Trent Jr., even if it seems like the ask with the negotiations with the Raptors might have been too high relative to what he got, he will have the opportunity to play. And the Bucks don't have even that many guys, depending on how Andre Jackson, Livingston, and a few of the other players look in summer league / training camp, like that are really going to push him for that spot. So, but remember that the challenge for Trent in this circumstance, and we saw with Malik Beasley, is that the team that signed you and gave you that opportunity only has non-bird rights at the minimum. So basically, if you're going back to the Bucks, it's because this year went really badly for you. You need somebody else to fall in love with you, but he will have the opportunity for that to occur.
Yeah, it's a rarity that you can do the Batum, be on the team for 3 years, build up bird rights, and actually get to an 8-figure contract. That is pretty unprecedented in NBA history. And Trent provides some off-the-dribble scoring juice, which they actually need because Chris Middleton is having arthroscopic surgery on both ankles. He missed a bunch of time with ankle issues. Of course, there are the knees as well that have bothered him. He had off-season surgery the last 2 summers. And so Trent, as not great as a third scorer because he never ever passes and is just going to take a few dribbles inside the arc and shoot a mid-ranger, but they actually are just going to need somebody to create some shots. Bobby Portis actually is somewhat of a similar game as well, operating from some similar areas, but at least to just eat some innings for you offensively, that's good. Can he build on being more of a spot-up shooter now that there are more threats around him, more spacing around him? I think his relationship with Damian Lillard, where I thought Trent looked the best he ever did, it was in the 2020 bubble, where he was providing a little bit more ball pressure defensively. He's going to be miscast as their number one defender on the perimeter, but Malik Beasley was as miscast as Hayden Christensen was in Star Wars.
Oh boy,
in that role. So I think that this is much better, and he can at least push the ball. He'll like get some steals, and hopefully they can get a little bit more out of him, like get him a little bit more disciplined defensively. Yeah, still not the guy you want as your lead defender, but he's at least not just an absolute turnstile the way Beasley was. So he's not going to get up as many threes or probably at the same percentage as Beasley did, but he does everything else better.
And I don't want to dwell on this too much, but it is another circumstance where Gary Trent Jr. is represented by Rich Paul, where Rich Paul has a reputation for being very aggressive. Like maybe I think back to the like Eric Bledsoe situation. There are, of course, numerous other ones with his star level clients. I am starting to build a little bit of a theory that doesn't work as well for the lower level guys. Nerlens Noel, of course, a prominent one who bet on himself. It didn't work out. And how much of that is the player? How much of that is the agent? It's always hard to parse. In part, kind of like we talk about a GM and an owner, it's the advice that you're giving. But when you are redundant in a market and you're not that good, sometimes that can evaporate really quickly. And the Raptors, what's striking is that they didn't replace Trent with an offseason addition. They're replacing him. We'll talk about their summer league down the line with other options.
What's next here?
We only have a couple other guys at the minimum. Seth Curry going back to the Hornets. I don't think we need to spend too much time on that one. Cam Payne taking the minimum with the Knicks. He'll probably be competing with Tyler Kolek for those backup point guard minutes. I would presume that Payne.
This signing kind of annoyed me a little bit. I mean, I guess maybe if Brunson misses time, like Payne can kind of step in and just like throw a bunch of shots up. But he also got Miles McBride. Like I think I'm concerned that this is going to lead to Kolek getting buried, and I think he is just a better passer than Payne. I'm just more interested to see what Kolek can do than Payne at this point. I mean, he's an NBA player. Like you get him for the minimum. Like they had the roster spot. I get that, but he's going to play over Kolek, and it's going to annoy me.
It is, and we don't have a resolution yet on the Precious Achiuwa situation. He is an unrestricted free agent. The Knicks have the capacity to bring him back. They have the wiggle room under the second apron, but it hasn't happened yet. What other opportunities are out there for Achiuwa? We will have to see. Spencer Dinwiddie finishes the year on the Lakers after getting cut, and is signing a 1-year minimum going back to the Dallas Mavericks. I'm surprised and disappointed that there weren't any better options. We're seeing like a pretty big gulf in the backup point guard market between like the guys who are potentially going to get some interest, and then basically everyone else is getting nothing. Monte Morris minimum, DeLon Wright minimum, Cam Payne, Aaron Holiday got the biannual, and then so it's pretty striking that a lot of these guys, Chris Dunn is getting more, but it might be in part to facilitate this trade. So I thought that Dinwiddie could have more interest. It appears that he just does not.
They had a terrible year last year and
True.
Got sent out of town in Brooklyn, and then it was immediately waived in Toronto. And then, with the Lakers, he was, really a fourth guard at best, and, just didn't show much ability to do anything inside the arc. And he could be a little bit of a tough personality. Also, Dallas is where he's had his best years since leaving Brooklyn the first time by far. And he'll give them another option. He'll compete with Jaden Hardy and Dante Exum. But I think there's a possibility maybe that like I'm not sure how reliable he's considered at this point. And, Morris as well. He's a guy who missed time with injuries last year. And market is really tight. I do think there's teams that maybe should be willing to go above the minimum to give him a shot. But they also, plenty of teams kind of want to go in a different direction, which I understand, because I don't know how you can't just like set it and forget it with him as your backup point guard, I would say, based on what we saw last year.
And I'm happy, the Mavericks having now Hardy, and then Kyrie Irving had surgery to replace a broken hand, that he suffered training during the month. I would guess that he'll be fine to start the year, but having supplemental creators, especially guys who can do a mix of on and off ball, it helps raise your regular season floor.
And Kyrie Irving, part of the reason why I think there might be some appeal with Dinwiddie is Irving can be injury prone. He was training and sustained a broken left hand. Hopefully he can return by the start of the season. The timeline, this would be a long time for a broken hand if he can't do that. And Kyrie's left hand obviously is is awesome. He's worked on that so much. It's been a really important part of his game since teams used to play him to go right all the time, or to force him left all the time, I should say. So he's developed those moves as a counter. So hopefully he'll be back. Darius Garland, he just put it on the record with Chris Fedor that he does not want to be traded and is excited about Donovan Mitchell's extension. There were some rumors that Rich Paul might not be interested in him remaining there, but Darius saying the right things. Until you make a trade request, there's absolutely no reason to indicate that you're the slightest bit unhappy. So that's good work there. And then the Spurs are still kind of, making you scratch your head a little bit with some of these moves.
They're not cornering the market, but they're having a lot of the backup bigs who don't shoot, with Charles Bassey, who was recovering from a torn ACL, and Mamkulashvili, who's
Bassey won't be back until mid-season at the earliest. And I mean, this is really just, it seems like someone that they just really like and like want to keep in their system. And I just don't really, I mean, maybe this is just hey, we're going to do the right thing for you. You tore your ACL playing with us, and it's going to go into next year. So we're going to make sure you still have a contract. He had been non-guaranteed. They waived him just so they could reduce his cap hold down to the rookie minimum with him off the team to fit in the Chris Paul signing and the Harrison Barnes trade. And brought him back, but he was on a non-guarantee. I still would rather they use this roster spot on someone else. But you remember like Livio Jean-Charles, they did this. They just signed him to a rookie deal and then like immediately waived him after he tore his ACL and was never any good. So I think this is just, at least I hope, them kind of doing him a solid. But, maybe I think what you do is you sign him to this and then, just waive him later. Like spending a roster spot on this as a rebuilding team for a guy who just, to me, hasn't shown much and doesn't really fit much. And you want to play Victor at center more. I don't love that.
And Mamkulashvili, like, there are people who believe in him more than I do. I've been like, okay, like a low end rotation player. It's not like he's super duper young at this or like unproven at this juncture. He's at least had opportunities, and so they're just putting a lot of roster spots on bigs that don't have starter equity. And when you consider that Victor Wembanyama is on this squad again, like it's fine, but it's not. It's not what I would be doing with these sorts of things. Maybe one or more of those guys will get waived.
But
like
Mamo's shown a little bit more of a skill set, maybe from the outside. But I still am just, like, he doesn't really have the level of defensive upside that I love playing next to him either.
And of course, the bigger issue in terms of money and all that was giving Zach Collins the extension that they did, where he's making 16.7 this year, 18.1 next year, but we don't need to redwell on that. And then the other last transaction of this pod is former Spur Corey Joseph signed a 2-year deal with the Orlando Magic.
I wonder if there's a team option on the end of that.
I have a guess. And so for Joseph, I think what's surprising to me about this, I mentioned earlier in the pod that it seems like, emphasis on seems, like the Magic have their they still have the room exception available, is that we don't know the terms yet of Corey Joseph's contract, but if it's guaranteed, that puts him at 15. You can go into a season with go into the preseason with more than 15 guaranteed contracts, but that would be at least a preliminary non-binding indication that they're not intending to use the room exception to bring somebody in. That could change. All sorts of other things can happen. But I would love to see the Magic add some talent, especially some shooting or shot creation, more than what Corey Joseph showed on the Warriors last year.
Yeah, and who knows? Maybe it's just like a totally non-guaranteed deal. But usually if it's for 2 years, there'll be some guarantee in year one. All right, that will do it. Please like and subscribe if you're watching on YouTube. We certainly appreciate that. And if you're not a Dunc'd On Pride subscriber, please give that a shot as well, because we still have the bulk of our Summer League coverage will be taking place exclusively there. Talk to y'all next time.